From obscure facts to cancelled and lost media, Silent Hill 1 is undoubtedly one of the more unique entries when it comes to covering such information that many of those who play this game may not know about. Which is why today, I wanted to make an iceberg that covers everything from obscure to completely unknown facts and details in the ultimate Silent Hill 1 Iceberg Explained. For those interested in a specific tier, I'll put timestamps in each chapter as we make our descent from the sky to the abyss down below, for the sake of your convenience. Next Sphere. Upon completing the game, you can unlock the Next Sphere playthrough. Next Sphere acts as a New Game Plus, allowing for multiple subsequent playthroughs to unlock different weapons, new difficulty modes, and endings. One interesting detail that is not told to the player is that upon starting Next Sphere, you start on the lowest difficulty, which would be easy. Upon completing your Next Sphere playthrough, the difficulty increases by the next difficulty level, which would be normal and then hard. Upon completing hard, the difficulty resets back to easy. In short, Next Sphere doesn't allow the player to change the difficulty. Extra options. The extra options expand upon the previous options menu, allowing for much more customability and Harry's versatility when it comes to more advanced controls in Harry's movement and abilities. However, the point of interest here is a couple of unique unlockable options that significantly alter the gameplay. For example, self-view mode is first unlocked by completing the game at least once, regardless of whatever ending you receive. Once self-view is selected, you must hold L2 to shift to this unique perspective where the camera is locked close behind Harry's head, working similarly to an over-the-shoulder camera angle in modern survival horror games. Bullet Adjust functions as a bullet multiplier, adding additional ammo capacity to each firearm such as the handgun, shotgun, or hunting rifle. This is unlocked by completing the game once, regardless of the ending. By doing so, it unlocks ×1 and ×2, which means that you have an additional number of bullets fixed to your weapon capacity. In total, the maximum capacity the bullet adjust is set to is by ×6. To reach this maximum bullet adjust, you must complete the 4 other endings in-game upon each consecutive playthrough, which would amount to the total of 5 endings. Extra weapons. Once you start your next playthrough, you can access 2 previously inaccessible weapons seen in your first playthrough, the chainsaw and the rock drill. To access these weapons, however, you first need to acquire the gas tank, as this is needed to fuel both weapons individually. The gas tank is accessible by entering the garage located next to Hal Gas Station. Once the gas tank is required, it can be used to power either the chainsaw or rock drill. However, there's a caveat to this. You can only power one of those weapons and can carry only one of them for the duration of the playthrough. For example, if you choose the chainsaw for the second playthrough, then you would have to play on the third playthrough to use the gas tank again on the rock drill. However, if you're to play on a fourth playthrough, upon using the gas tank on both the chainsaw and rock drill previously, then the gas tank will not be necessary to fuel these respective weapons. The chainsaw can be found on Block Street in the Cut Right Chainsaw store, lying behind a smashed window. The chainsaw functions as a melee weapon that deals significant damage upon using it to the monsters in-game by slicing them in half instantly. To turn on and use, hold the R2 button and tap the X button to input standard swings. Alternatively, you can hold the X button to enact a downward slash with a chainsaw. The rock drill can be found in the bottom floor of O Ridge Control Room. The rock drill functions similarly to a firearm. As Harry holds the weapon towards an enemy standing still, he baits the monster into running into the drill to deal damage. To use, hold the R2 button and press X to stab enemies with a forward motion to extend its range. The katana can be found in a locked side room in the 11th Street house that is only accessible upon completing the game with a good and bad ending. The katana functions as a melee weapon with significant and heavy damage output that instantaneously kills an enemy upon impact. To use, hold the R2 button to raise the katana and press X to perform a standard melee swing. By holding the X button, you can perform a downward slash. UFO ending. A recurring running gag seen through the Silent Hill series is the joke ending called the UFO ending. The UFO ending is typically seen as a secret ending that is unlocked through specific requirements that mostly see the player having to use the channeling stone. The channeling stone functions as a device to contact the Greys, the aliens of the Silent Hill universe, at various locations throughout the story. To unlock the UFO ending, you must complete the game at least once. Then, on a second playthrough, you find the aforementioned channeling stone in the convenience store 8. Once the channeling stone has been obtained, you must use it at 5 different locations set throughout the story. The first location is the rooftop of Midwich Elementary School during the Otherworld sequence. The second location is the front entrance of Alchemilla Hospital during the Otherworld sequence. The third location is the parking lot at Norman's Motel in the resort area. The fourth location is inside the boat cabin during the Otherworld resort area sequence. And finally, the fifth location is at the Lakeside Pier Lighthouse. If done correctly, you'll unlock the UFO ending. In this ending, Harry makes contact with the Greys, asking them if they've seen a little girl with short black hair who just turned 7 last month, only to be incapacitated by a laser gun and held captive as the Greys' prisoner. Upon completing the UFO ending, you get rewarded with a Hyper Blaster. This weapon is set in your inventory once you start a new playthrough. The Hyper Blaster has infinite ammunition, will automatically lock onto any enemy, has excellent long range, and deals heavy damage. There are 3 variations of the laser for the Hyper Blaster, dependent on the player's star ranking of their overall high score via the results screen upon completing the game. A 0 to 7 star ranking will reward you with a red laser. An 8 to 9 star ranking will reward you with a yellow laser. And finally, a 10 star ranking will reward you with a green laser. Aglophidus. While exploring Alchemilla Hospital, Harry finds a red liquid in the director's office. This red liquid is known as Aglophidus. According to the Kabbalah, a Jewish text of mystical religious interpretations within Judaism, the name is derived from a herb grown in the Arabian desert, which is said to grant the power to dispel demonic forces and grant supernatural immunity to those who possess the item. Aglophidus is said to be connected to the Paeonia, a European flowering plant found in the mountains of southern Europe. Paeonia was a herb used for medicinal purposes. The Greek doctor, Dioscorides, named Aglophidus as a member of the Paeoni family, and speculated that Aglophidus served as the main source. Aglophidus serves as an integral item to obtain the Good Plus ending. Foretold by gyromancy. In a cutscene between Harry and Dahlia, she states that their meeting was fate as it was foretold by gyromancy. While it's become a meme over the years, the saying gyromancy is a ritualistic method where someone spins or walks around the circumference of a circle drawn on the ground, with letters from the alphabet inscribed around the circumference. The ritual performance is based on the letters where the person stumbles, falls, or lands. The purpose of practicing this ritualistic performance is intended to create a random or altered state of consciousness to aid in predicting the future. Floros. The Floros is an important contraption-like device that is possessed by Dahlia Gillespie, later passed down to Harry. Dahlia refers to the Floros as a cage of peace and counteracting with the underworld. On the surface, this is meant to conceal demonic forces, but in actuality, it's used as Dahlia's secret trump card, which is meant to dispel Lessa of her telekinesis powers. In occult teachings, Floros is derived as the Great Duke of Hell, seen as a seeker of truth in the past, present, and future. However, he also may deceive and lie. Furthermore, unless he is commanded into a magic triangle, only then he will speak the truth. Floros also later appears in the occult work, The Lesser Key of Solomon, seen as one of the 72 demons that appear in the Leamington, a book of magic said to have been compiled from the writings of King Solomon of Israel. Seal of Metatron. Before Alessa's capture by her mother, Dahlia falsely claims to Harry that the Mark of Samael was a ritual that Alessa was orchestrating to cause annihilation to the town, as a means of not only putting an end to the cult, but also committing ritualistic suicide. While this is partially true, Dahlia misleads Harry by fabricating the Mark of Samael, rather than stating the truth, which is the Seal of Metatron. In reality, the Mark of Samael is nothing but mere fodder, and serves no significance to the Order, seen merely as a talisman. However, this is up for debate. In Jewish mythology, Metatron serves as an angel standing close to God as a mediator of humanity. As God's scribe, Metatron records all human and divine choices, granting him immense knowledge and wisdom. This knowledge makes him a powerful figure, able to use it for manipulation and control. Samael, depicted as an angel of death, is one of the 7 archangels who serves as the king of all demons, loosely equating to that of Satan in some cultures, such as Jewish mysticism. Interestingly, in the official documentation, Lost Memories Silent Hill Chronicle, according to the Kabbalah, the angels Metatron and Samael originally share the same existence, implying that they both serve under the function of the Seal of Metatron. While the Seal of Metatron is seen as nothing more than a talisman for the Order, it contradicts those claims as Alessa planned to use this ritualistic occult practice by inscribing 5 Seal of Metatron symbols throughout Old Silent Hill, Central Silent Hill, and the resort area. These 5 symbols are inscribed at Midwich Elementary School, Alchemilla Hospital, Green Line Antique Shop, Lakeside Lighthouse, and finally, Lakeside Amusement Park. Had Alessa become successful in this ritual, she likely would have caused complete annihilation to the town in an attempt to not only end the cult itself, but rather, to end her life. To purge the embryo god maturing inside of her. This is seen as Alessa's insurance policy. Due to the ritual, Dahlia performed years ago on Alessa, casting a spell on her which made her susceptible to the forces and power of the god. The god would protect Alessa from harm or even self-inflicted harm upon her. Konami Burger. In central Silent Hill, Harry can find a local burger joint called Konami Burger. This is obviously an inside joke and direct reference to video game publisher Konami. Fun fact, Konami is best known for not only owning the IP franchises such as Silent Hill, Metal Gear Solid, Bomberman, and Castlevania, but also subsequently sabotaging their own franchises by doing absolutely nothing with them, at least up until recently. Street names. Silent Hill 1 is heavily influenced by Western pop culture, such as literature, films, artists, and authors. For example, many of the street signs you see in Old Silent Hill, Central Silent Hill, and the resort area are based on real-world authors. Bachman Road is a reference to Richard Bachman, a pen name Stephen King used for the Bachman books. Block Street is a reference to Robert Bloch. Bradbury Street is a reference to Ray Bradbury. Alroy Street is a reference to James Alroy. Finney Street is a reference to Jack Finney. Matheson Street is a reference to Richard Matheson. Levin Street is a reference to Ira Levin. Midwich Street is a reference to the 1957 novel The Midwich Cuckoos, written by the English author John Wyndham. Western culture references. In Cafe 522, there are a couple of references to various pop culture media. By the Notebook to Save Your Game, there's a poster with text that reads, "Study damn it." This is the young Stephen King with a shotgun that was taken during his time in college. According to the SK Shop Tour of Maine, it states that the origin of this poster was during Stephen King's last 2 years as a columnist for the Maine campus, the university, a Maine student-run newspaper. Next to this poster is the 1997 pinball machine Medieval Madness. On the window of the cafe, there's a poster of the 1997 song All Mine by the electronic music band Portishead. Portishead is one of the inspirations to have heavily influenced the works of series composer Akira Yamaoka. Yamaoka samples one of the songs from Portishead's album Dummy titled Sour Times to compose the main theme of Silent Hill 1, Hometown. The convenience store 8 located on Bachman Road is a reference to 7-Eleven. The gas station located near Balkan Church, Hell Station, is a reference to Shell Station. If you look closely at the Hell Station logo, you can see that the S in Shell is scribbled out. On Block Street, you can find a garage door with the words Red Rum, a reference to The Shining. Next to this is a pixelated graphic of the alcohol brand Jack Daniels. The building next to it has a pixelated graphic of the alcohol brand Jim Beam. Inside the Old Ridge Bridge control room are Playboy magazines on the table. Down the road on Block Street is a building called Boston Market, a reference to the fast food chain Boston Market. The newspaper stand, located in the town of Silent Hill, has a headline that reads, Billskin's Fifth. This is a reference to the antagonist character, Buffalo Bill, from Silence of the Lambs. The newspaper in-game directly references a newspaper also seen in the film. At the end of Block Street is a store called Cut Right Chainsaws. This is a reference to the same store seen in the film Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. On Bachman Road, the fast food chain, Queen Burger, is a reference to the fast food chain, Burger King. In central Silent Hill, there are once again street names that directly reference authors. Crichton Street is a reference to Michael Crichton. Kuntz Street is a reference to Dean Kuntz. Saigon Street is a reference to American astronomer Carl Sagan. Simmons Street is a reference to Dan Simmons. The restaurant, A Movable Feast, is a reference to Ernest Hemingway's memoir of the same name. At the end of Simmons Street, you can find 2 posters that are advertisements for the 1976 film Carrie. On the same street, you can also find the store Mushnick's Florist. Walking up closely to the storefront, you can find a sign with a name that reads Audrey Jr. These are all references to the 1960 film Little Shop of Horrors. At Movie Theater 3, the film Shoot references Raiders of the Lost Ark. In the film Crusher Dan references Die Hard 2. The store, Chinese Art Goods, when translated from Mandarin to English, reads Bruce Lee, a reference to the martial artist Bruce Lee. Inside the police station, you can find a poster next to the central Silent Hill map. The poster is a reference to Exposition Universelle, 1889. Inside Silent Hill Town Center, there's a retail store called Vestal Gigastore. This is a reference to the retail store Virgin Megastore. In the resort area, there are once again street names that are references to authors. Craig Street is a reference to Lillian Craig, more specifically, her pen name that went by Kit Craig. Sanford Street is a reference to John Sanford. Norman's Motel is a reference to the fictional character Norman Bates, the main protagonist of the 1959 novel Psycho. Inside the building, Indian Runner, there are boxes with the name FedEx, a reference to FedEx. The fast food chain Mechburger is a reference to McDonald's. Kindergarten Cop. The likeness of Midwich Elementary School took heavy inspiration from the movie Kindergarten Cop, more specifically, John Jacob Astor Elementary School. The base setting where much of Kindergarten Cop was filmed, which was located in Astoria, Oregon. REM sleep cycles. Throughout the game, Harry will encounter odd and abrupt shifts between the day and night cycles. In one instance, Harry will be seen roaming the town of Old Silent Hill, with fog obscuring his path, while snow drops silently on the pavement. After exiting through a back door, Harry then sees a sudden shift from the moody atmosphere of the day to a haunting and eerie presence of the night, with silence in its ambience. According to the official Silent Hill guidebook, these changes occur because there's a cycle in the world of Les's nightmares that corrupts the town. For context, a person normally repeats what is called REM sleep and non-REM sleep in regular cycles while they're sleeping. This process coincides with the supernatural element in Silent Hill through the otherworld as it approaches the deeper cycle of sleep. The otherworld is perceived as a supernatural phenomenon in which light is dissipated and the world shifts to an even deeper nightmare as the cycle shifts again. Furthermore, it isn't that one is reality and one is a dream, but rather, neither is reality. Incidentally, the reason the otherworld takes on such an ominous aspect is due to Les's upbringing. This manifestation of her trauma and her nightmares twisted and amplified these internalized thoughts of her pain and suffering. PTV. Inside Al Camilla Hospital, Harry finds a basement room with a handful of medical drugs that he assumes are for patients. However, Harry has his reservations regarding said drugs as he notices something odd with a certain group of manufactured drugs that are distributed to patients. Harry's concerns would be correct, as the drug in question is called PTV. PTV is an illegally distributed drug manufactured by Michael Kaufman, the director of Al Camilla Hospital. Kaufman would elicit this drug by using his position at Al Camilla Hospital to distribute these drugs to local pharmacies in the town of Silent Hill. This illegal practice of the PTV drug would eventually go mainstream, as the mayor would vocalize these concerns publicly, and a police officer, Officer Gucci, would investigate this illegal activity. The Order would catch wind of this and have members, presumably Kaufman, take care of this matter, as both of these public figures would end up deceased suddenly. It's speculated that PTV is manufactured by the ingredient White Claudia, derived from the plant that grows near water sources in the resort town of Silent Hill. Its seeds contain hallucinogenic properties that have been used in the cult's ritualistic ceremonies and practices. An idea of how this drug affected the user would be with Lisa Garland. Lisa was forcefully subjected to taking the drug and gaining an addiction to it, which had Kaufman use this as leverage to blackmail her into doing illegal work for him. Lisa would describe such hallucinogenic effects such as seeing the room filled with insects despite her needing to throw up but cannot, leaving only bile to come out of her vomit, or seeing blood and pus pour out the water faucet of the sink. Norman Young. An accomplice in Kaufman's illegal distribution of the drug PTV, Norman Young uses Norman's Motel, to likely use as a front to allow Kaufman to conduct dealings and transportation of PTV, as a means of not getting caught and likely as an alibi in case he is questioned. At some point, Norman Young would get cold feet and decide to quit after realizing his sudden conscious thoughts of the legal work he is committing with Kaufman. Not much else is known about Norman Young, but it's speculated that he eventually did end up leaving this legal work behind. Kay Gordon. In Midwich Elementary School, Harry can find notes documented by a teacher named Kay Gordon, Leslie Gillespie's homeroom teacher. Kay Gordon would take notice of Leslie Gillespie's bullying from her local classmates, but also speculate that her mother was physically abusing her. This would escalate to where Kay Gordon devised whether she should take accountability and likely alert Child Protective Services or the police of Alessa's abuse. However, much to Alessa's dismay, Gordon would detract from helping her as she would grow scared of the Order's position and likely silencing her, and rather decide to wait things out. Not much is known about what happens to Kay Gordon after these events. It's speculated that she was potentially murdered by the Order, as Harry can find a massive amount of blood covering the garage door of a house under the name Kay Gordon. However, this is mere speculation. E3 1998 demo. Before the release of Silent Hill, the first publicly accessible demo was at E3 1998. In a video by YouTube user Gyromancy, we see a short 30-second segment of Konami marketing manager Joe Sloan describing the synopsis of Silent Hill whilst showing gameplay of Harry roaming the back alleys during the opening sequence. In a second video, we see a very interesting graphic of the early design of the Silent Hill logo, which looks drastically different from the finalized logo, alongside more footage of Harry roaming the dark-filled hallways of Midwich Elementary School, cautiously as he has his handgun equipped. PlayStation Magazine Demo Disc number 16. The first publicly accessible demo available to a wider audience that wasn't limited to a gaming convention center, such as E3, was distributed on the official PlayStation Magazine Demo Disc. The PlayStation Demo Disc was used under retail, subscription, and trade. Retail demos were given away or used at retailers like GameStop or EB Games. Subscription demos were mail-away demos to those under the subscription service. Finally, trade demos were samples provided to journalists and media publications to review the game beforehand. In Demo Disc number 16, Silent Hill was publicly available to the US audience under the Silent Hill trial version. In this demo, the player got to play either the story or battle mode. The story mode was the opening sequence up until Harry meets Sybil in Cafe 5-2. The battle mode is the Midwich Elementary School sequence where Harry must navigate Midwich Elementary School and Otherworld Midwich Elementary School, needing to escape the school with a key, ending the battle mode demo. Play novel Silent Hill. Play novel Silent Hill is a Japan-only visual novel that adapts the events of Silent Hill 1 in an interactive story format. Much of the gameplay is dialogue-based with visuals provided through frames of CGI renders from the original game, but in some exceptions, where the renders of the characters, monsters, and the environment are unique to the visual novel. While it is a visual novel, there is technically combat, puzzles, and multiple endings. What's unique about this visual novel is that it provides a second scenario featuring Sybil Bennett as a playable character seen from her perspective on the events of Silent Hill, as well as DLC featuring a third scenario with a boy named Andy. His scenario is considered partial lost media, however, as Konami ended the download service and preservation of the DLC was never properly stored. Christina's World. The Gillespie household is seen originally in the intro FMV very briefly, located on the outskirts of Silent Hill. The Gillespie house is based on a famous painting titled Christina's World, depicting a woman lying on a grassy, barren field looking up at the house on the horizon. This painting is based on the real-world Olsen house in Cushing, Maine. While this is speculative, it's important to note how the woman in this painting parallels Alessa Gillespie when it comes to their physical limitations that bear resemblance. While different in terms of context, the woman, Anna Christina Olsen, is depicted as suffering from a degenerative muscle disease. According to the artist, Andrew Wyeth, he was inspired by Anna's unique determination in navigating her world despite her disabilities. This parallels Alessa Gillespie, a girl who, unfortunately, was subjected to forced impregnation and mutilation through a tragic accident as a byproduct of a ritual that saw her burned and immobilized for 7 long years. Despite her disabilities, she garnered the determination to preserve the essence of that innocence through the byproduct of splitting her soul in half, producing Cheryl Mason. Hidden button combinations. There are a couple of hidden button combinations. For example, you can save anywhere at any point during the game. To do this, while on the pause screen with the pause text visible, and then press and hold the following: D-pad left, plus left stick left, plus right stick left, plus L1, plus L2, plus L3. If done correctly, the save menu will be brought up so you can save the game. Another hidden button combination is soft reset. To do this, you must input the following button combination: L1 plus L2 plus R1 plus R2 plus start plus select. This will soft reset the game back to the main menu. Silent Hill Official Novel. Silent Hill, or formerly known in kanji, Saranto Hiru, is officially published by Konami Novels as a Japan-only novel adaptation of Silent Hill. Written by Sadamu Yamashita, the novel serves as a companion piece that gives a bit more fleshed out development to the characters, alongside new illustrations by Masahiro Ito. While the novel is only localized in Japan, fans have successfully translated it unofficially, such as Winter, who unofficially localized a full English translation of the Silent Hill official novel to completion, which you can read yourself via a PDF document. Unused monsters. There are approximately 9 unused monsters found within the game files. These unused monsters are likely earlier beta models that were conceptualized to give a rough idea of the finalized version of the monsters that are seen in the final game. The file BTFY, or Butterfly, is of a butterfly-like monster that resembles much of the Floatstinger boss that you fight atop the post office in Otherworld Central Silent Hill. The file EL, presumably short for Manta Ray, given the appearance of the monster, resembles much of the real-life aforementioned aquatic sea creature. The file FRG, or Frog, depicts a monster-like frog with 2 arms in the front and 2 legs in the back. The file MKY, or Monkey, shows a depiction of a monkey with a bloodied mouth and a bruised face with sharp tendrils at the ends of their arms that are also covered with bloodstains. The file OST, or Ostrich, is a huge creature with blood on its mouth and feet, along with a sharp, tongue-like tendril. The file SNK, or Snake, resembles much of a typical snake, with its most notable quality in its tongue, which functions similarly to the previously seen ostrich. The file CHK, or Chicken, depicts a heavily contorted chicken with qualities that resemble those of a newborn hatchling. Interestingly, the chicken has the most applied animations to its model out of all the unused monsters, which can be supported as it was possibly intended to be featured as a boss fight given its massive size, as well as spawning in the boss fight where you fight the split head. While the chicken would go unused, it likely was repurposed for the air screamer as it serves notable similarities. YouTube user Rodolfo Nunez uncovered 2 unused monsters in the game files that served as test models. The file Big is straightforward, as it is a big and large model of a monster that would have potentially served as a boss at some point, given its massive size. It noticeably lacks in texture quality, only supporting a basic texture model with one animation where it disappears completely. Lastly, the file SPD, or Spider, is an unfinished model of presumably a spider, given the model's rig containing 6 spider-like legs. This model supports animations, but no actual textured model for the spider. International Track and Field. The Konami IP, Track and Field, known as Hyper Olympic in Japan, released a 3D update to the previous version released only in Japanese arcades called Hyper Athlete for the PlayStation. This update would be called International Track and Field, which would be released globally in North America, Europe, and Japan. Interestingly, many of the textures used in International Track and Field were repurposed into some of the textures for Silent Hill. Hidden Doodles. In the game files, there are textures of hidden doodles from presumably the developers that can't be found. These show either silly smiling faces or text in Japanese that are presumably left as notes for the staff. For example, the file sh1thr2001f contains Japanese text that reads, "It's a map." The file sh1thr3071f contains very faint text that reads either sign or billboard. Silent Hill DX. Silent Hill DX is a Japan-only mobile game adapting Silent Hill for the FOMA 90X series 3G mobile phone. The game consists of 3 chapters. At the end of each chapter, the player is given a password that is needed to progress to the next chapter. Each chapter takes place in a different location, in which Harry visits in his search for Cheryl. These following locations are Midwich Elementary School, Alchemilla Hospital, and Otherworld. There is a supported battle system that is based on random encounters. Similar to an RPG, Harry and the monsters take turns omitting actions in a turn-based combat system. Furthermore, the gameplay is point and click, allowing the player to navigate the world and interact with the environment, along with an item and map system. Cancelled Silent Hill graphic novel. To coincide with the release of Silent Hill, there would have been a promotional tie-in graphic novel simply titled Silent Hill. The graphic novel would have featured 70 pages, serving as an adaptation of the game's story. The publisher, ComX, would gain permission to hold the IP rights of Silent Hill to publish the graphic novel. However, plans wouldn't reach fruition due to unknown reasons. For years, the reasons as to why plans fell through would be undisclosed, although the fallout would finally be revealed in a DeviantArt post on February 19, 2007 by the interior artist Neil Googe. Googe would go about posting never-before-seen artwork from the graphic novel itself, along with a summary as to what happened with the novel not getting released to the public. According to Googe, he states that before he was employed with the publisher, ComX, he was working with 2 guys at their own design company. He eventually landed the job and was employed to design the Silent Hill graphic novel for the next 6 months as the company landed the rights from Konami. Gouge would spend the next 6 months designing the 70 pages of the graphic novel and eventually finished it. However, as we all know, the graphic novel would never see the light of day. In 2021, a user on the Lost Media Wiki would personally contact Gouge about the graphic novel in hopes of getting his inquiries answered regarding the reason for the cancellation. According to the user, he states in an email with Gouge that the entirety of the 70 pages from the graphic novel was lost due to the project being stored on a CD, which was unfortunately never properly preserved and was permanently deleted. Neil then exclaims that the reason for the cancellation of the graphic novel was due to intercompany politics between Konami and its European branch, resulting in a fallout. According to Gouge, he states the following: "We were commissioned by Konami Europe, I believe, to produce the comic as promotional material for Silent Hill 2. It was going to be published separately and in a special edition of the game. Konami Japan also wants to use the comic. Konami Europe, which had paid for the project, wanted some sort of payment for that use from Konami Japan. Konami Japan refused to pay any kind of fee, so Konami Europe, in retaliation, said they couldn't use it. At which point, Konami Japan, who technically owned all copyrights on Silent Hill, then blocked Europe from releasing the book under usage rights, not getting proper permission, etc. With this revelation, Gouge would salvage only 5 remaining pages that were fortunately preserved and posted on his DeviantArt page. The first page is the product catalog, which provides proof of the comic's existence. The next page is an illustration of presumably the puppet nurses and puppet doctors seen in Alchemilla Hospital. Next are illustrations of the opening nightmare sequence, which sees Harry exploring the alleyway up until he is killed by the Great Children. The next page shows what looks like the aftermath of Dahlia Gillespie's ritual performed on her daughter, Alessa Gillespie. This shows the Gillespie house in flames with nearby townspeople witnessing the events, alongside firefighters carrying out a burnt and charred Alessa. The final page shows Harry Mason and Michael Kaufman, presumably meeting for the first time in Alchemilla Hospital, where we see Harry pleading with Kaufman not to shoot him as he isn't one of the monsters. Europe and Japan version differences. For the European and Japan versions of Silent Hill, there are small yet noticeable differences in comparison to the US version. The main menu for the Japan version features a different logo compared to the North American and European versions. It has a light green hue of a drop shadow, along with a simple black background. The options menu has a gray, semi-transparent overlay for the UI and Japanese text at the bottom, which reads, Key Config. The main menu of the European version contains a similar, simple black background to the Japanese version, albeit with a similar logo to the US version. The European version also has a language option to choose between English, German, French, Spanish, and Italian subtitles. It also shows a slightly altered model of Harry's render in the background. The biggest difference between the US version and the Japanese and European versions is that the Great Child is replaced by the Mumbler. This is due to the Great Child failing to pass censorship laws in both Europe and Japan, as they resemble too closely to the likeness of real-life children due to their design. Cementing this censorship is the fact that the player has the option to kill the Great Child during gameplay, with either a firearm or a melee weapon. Trade demo, fully voiced dialogue. In the resort area, Harry can enter a building called Annie's Bar, where he encounters a Mumbler attacking Michael Kaufman, saving Kaufman as a result. After this exchange between the two, Harry can undergo an optional side quest that is important to acquire the Good Plus ending. Upon completing the side quest, Harry will end up in the garage of the motel to unexpectedly meet Kaufman once again. What's interesting about this particular encounter is that in the final version, after Kaufman leaves, Harry was originally intended to have fully voiced dialogue, but this wouldn't be included, and instead, subtitled to vocalize his internalized thoughts. However, in the trade demo, Harry has fully voiced dialogue, giving his thoughts after Kaufman leaves.
Unless you want to die, keep your mind on business. Got it?
That guy's gotta be involved in the local drug racket. Man, was he pissed. In such a rush, too. That was probably dope in the bottle. Anyway, better let him do as he pleases. There's more than my life at stake.
Konami Justifier. The Konami Justifier is a light gun peripheral accessory released on multiple home consoles, such as the Sega Genesis, SNES, and PlayStation, that are supported by specific games that have the peripheral as an add-on. Interestingly, the Konami Justifier served as inspiration for the Hyper Blaster, and if the light gun peripheral is connected to the second controller port of the PlayStation, the player will instantly unlock the Hyper Blaster in-game, as it will appear in the inventory upon starting the game in a New Game Plus playthrough. Cage of Cradle. In 2006, members from Team Silent, Hiroyuki Owaku and Masahiro Ito, created two Silent Hill comics titled Cage of Cradle and Double Under Dusk. Both comics were exclusive to Japan and released digitally on cell phones for a limited time only. Although there were talks to eventually release print releases in both America and Japan, this unfortunately never reached fruition. The comic that is of interest for this entry, however, is Silent Hill Cage of Cradle, which serves as a prequel to Silent Hill 1. This follows the main protagonist named Matthew, the boyfriend of Lisa Garland. Much of the comic is considered partial lost media, as Masahiro Ito only released a couple of screenshot images, due to signing a contract from Konami that doesn't allow permission to disclose and distribute, which would violate the terms and guidelines. What pages have been found, however, were pieced together by fans that give a vague outline of its plot. From what's been gathered, the story would have seen Matthew travel to Silent Hill to save Lisa from the Order, but due to the influence of Alessa's manifestations corrupting the town, Matthew is transported to the Otherworld. Matthew would witness the birth of Altiel, and subsequently be killed by Alessa. Due to this, Lisa becomes enraged and blames Alessa for the death of Matthew, resulting in Lisa strangling Alessa. However, because Valtiel is ascribed to protect and foresee God's birth, specifically Alessa, as she serves as a surrogate host mother, the monster would intervene and kill Lisa. She would later be reborn as a monster and wander the Otherworld alone, losing her memories as she would become manifested as a spirit created through Alessa's memories of her time with Lisa. Beta puppet nurses and doctors. The puppet nurse and puppet doctor had unused beta designs compared to their final counterparts. Typically, there are 3 variations of the respective puppet nurse and puppet doctor, distinct by the difference in their clothing, appearance, or facial features and hairstyle. Upon initial glance, the beta versions look much more detailed compared to the final version. The most notable difference is in the high poly count and the texture quality of the beta models compared to the final models. Unused rooms. Much of the early mock-ups of the 3D maps and the locations explored throughout the game would go unused, but interestingly, still exists in the final game itself. For example, if we were to use a Silent Hill level viewer, a Unity engine application that extracts and ports the 3D maps from the game into the engine itself, we can have access to a first-person camera and have free mobility to roam each level at our leisure. In Midwich Elementary School, there are a couple of unused maps that were left in the game. In Alchemilla Hospital, exploring out of bounds, you can see unused 3D models that were roughly textured but never finalized. There is also an unused room of furniture, picture frames, and a symbol of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ found in the game files. The interior of the room itself is noticeably far more polished with details in its textures, likely displaying the high poly count the engine can render. Andy's Scenario. Play novel Silent Hill originally had a post DLC, which has become quite a mystery over time. This DLC would feature a third scenario of a protagonist named Andy, a young boy who was a neighbor to both Harry and Cheryl Mason. Andy's story was broken into 4 chapters that correlate to 4 seasons: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. The first chapter, A Boy's Story, Spring, would be released in May 2001 via the mobile adapter for the Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance mobile adapter would be used to connect to the internet and download the data to the Game Boy Advance's internal memory. However, the biggest flaw is that the downloaded chapter wouldn't be properly saved once the player powered off the console. Because of this, the chapters are never properly preserved, and the other chapters would become lost media. While we wouldn't exactly know what happens in the later chapters of Andy's Scenario, we can gather a vague idea that much of his story would coincide with both Harry and Sybil's scenario. He and Cheryl Mason would also play a significantly larger role in his scenario. In Sybil's scenario, Andy makes a brief cameo when Sybil finds him drowning in an aqueduct, where she proceeds to save him. Afterward, Andy then proceeds to attack Sybil and blames her for pushing him into the aqueduct. Sybil attempts to stop Andy to defuse the situation, but later becomes unconscious. With the play novel Silent Hill Official Guidebook, we can find a page that allows the player to see a couple of screenshots of in-game renders, alongside a story flowchart in Japanese text that elaborates in detail on the first chapter of Andy's scenario in Spring. When translated into English, the scenario sees Andy as a Mason's neighbor who has a crush on Cheryl Mason. It's revealed they attend the same school together. However, Andy hasn't mustered the courage to express his feelings for her. When Andy decides to finally profess his feelings to Cheryl, both Harry and Cheryl subsequently happen to travel to Silent Hill, which sees Andy sneak into the back of Harry's Jeep to hitch a ride with him. After the car crash, leaving Harry unconscious and Cheryl's disappearance, Andy wanders into the town of Silent Hill to find Cheryl. The spring chapter has two endings. The first ending sees Andy staring into the large chasm, fearing that Cheryl fell into it and would be unable to help her. He then hears someone approaching him, presumably Alessa Gillespie, but he cannot move to see who it is as his body is unable to move to see who's behind him, leaving the ending with a cliffhanger. In the second ending, Andy reaches the chasm to lament about Cheryl falling into it. He then proceeds to step forward and fall into the chasm, unable to move once he falls to the bottom, leaving him incapacitated. Ambulance ending. In the early days of the internet, one of the forums would engage in conversation about supposedly rumored endings that were proposed to have a secret ambulance ending. As the rumor goes, some users conversed about the myth of claiming to have received a secret ambulance ending. This rumor would circulate amongst the fandom and would grow large enough to where a video on YouTube one day would abruptly appear out of nowhere. This video would go into detail on how to achieve the secret ambulance ending. According to the video, the player would need to finish the game on hard difficulty with at least a 9 out of 10 star ranking, allowing the player in the next playthrough to unlock the secret 5th ending. Upon starting your 5th playthrough, you would have to collect the bottle of distilled water and the glucose in the Midwich Elementary School, items that were originally unobtainable before. Upon acquiring these items, Harry would then have to construct an explosive to blow open the gate to the ambulance bay in Alchemilla Hospital. Once done, Harry then needs to find an oil can to use on the engine at the Hal gas station in Old Silent Hill. Finally, once the engine is acquired, Harry then places the engine in the ambulance. Once installed, Harry then would drive off in the ambulance to escape Silent Hill. Now, obviously, this secret ambulance ending is completely false and likely a harmless urban legend developed by some users in the fandom. Calgar Denock. In the opening FMV, Harry and Cheryl are seen driving to Silent Hill. In this scene, Cheryl is clutching onto her sketchbook called Drawing Block. Upon completing the game, in the same opening FMV cutscene, Cheryl's sketchbook is now titled Calgar Denock. As to why this oddity happened so suddenly is unknown. It can be assumed that this is a mistranslation or spelling error from Team Silent when it came to translating English from Japanese that went unnoticed during development. Town.tmd. Data mining the game files found in the test directory is an early 3D mockup titled Town.tmd, which sees a small portion of the town of Silent Hill, showing a couple of highly textured buildings and low poly models. This early build of the town was likely used as a reference to demonstrate an idea of how high the poly count could be handled in the engine due to the limitations of the PlayStation memory. Final boss skip. It's possible to defeat the final boss, Incubus, without having to deal damage. If the player were to enter the final boss fight without any ammunition for their firearms, such as the handgun, shotgun, or rifle, then the assumption is that they'd be stun locked and incapable of defeating Incubus, due to the melee weapons lacking range to register the hitbox to deal damage to the Incubus. However, it seems that Team Silent knew about this issue and had a failsafe implemented into the game's coding to recognize this predicament. If the player enters the boss fight without ammunition, the game will then count down from a timer for an unspecified amount of time, before the Incubus is defeated by default. It's unknown how long the timer takes when it comes to waiting out the final boss, but it can be conceived that it works differently upon each difficulty. For example, on easy, it takes 2 minutes, on normal, 4 minutes, and on hard, 6 minutes. However, this is just an estimate, and the vitality behind the statement is up for debate, as again, there's no definitive answer. Regardless, once the timer ends, the Incubus will be defeated. Beta model Grey Child. The Grey Child initially had quite the troubled development when it came to conceptualizing a design that was appropriate enough when finalizing the monster. The first early model depicted a humanoid-like monster with childish features, featuring fleshy-like skin and black beady eyes. And the second early model, it still encompassed this childlike appearance with fleshy skin, but the eyes are now removed, with the only noticeable facial features was its mouth. The third early model would become the final design of the Grey Child, which bears a lot of similarity to the previous design, although now supports grey-like skin and a slightly different head structure. Furthermore, the early beta models initially had an early running animation that saw them skipping towards Harry when attacking. The final version shows a revised running animation and instead is seen slowly walking towards Harry. Because the larval stalker also bears resemblance to the Grey Child, such as supporting a childlike appearance, it too went through a heavy revision to remove any and all appearance that resembles that of a human-looking child, for the sake of negating and complying with censorship laws in Europe and Japan. The final version of the larval stalker would support a translucent appearance that sees them as a pacifist type of enemy. that can't deal damage to Harry, and likewise, Harry cannot deal damage to the larval stalker. PSP Remake. In an interview with William Martell, at the time, a producer under the development studio, Climax Studios, was asked by Plague Magazine before the release of Silent Hill Origins if Team Silent had any input in regards to the development cycle of Silent Hill Origins. The interviewer asked Martell if it was a collaborative effort between Team Silent and Climax Studios, to which Martell revealed that it wasn't, as Team Silent didn't offer much input during development. Martell states that because Team Silent was busy conceiving their respective projects at their headquarters in Japan, the task to fill in the next title was quite the undertaking. Furthermore, in this conceptual phase prior to production, Climax Studios initially had the original idea of developing a remake of Silent Hill for the PSP. However, this was quickly scrapped as the studio realized that they would have to start from scratch to remake Silent Hill. This of course led to the production and eventual release of the prequel called Silent Hill Origins. Harold Mason. While Harry goes under the alias of Harry Mason, his official legal name is Harold Mason. This is officialized in official guidebooks such as Lost Memories Silent Hill Chronicle on page 24 in the Silent Hill Character Commentary section. This reveals Harry's full legal name as Harold Harry Mason. Furthering this rabbit hole is the creator's comment revealing that Harry's name was originally Humbert Mason. This was quickly scrapped, however, due to the obscurity of this name being uncommon amongst an English audience. Beta model Sybil Bennett. An early beta model, Sybil Bennett, shows a very similar design to her final version, albeit with a minor design in the facial appearance and her hairstyle. Unused Harry Mason animations. There are multiple unused animations unique to Harry Mason. An unused idle animation initially saw Harry fold and cross his arms as he waits patiently, shifting his body in direction to his left and his right. Interestingly, this idle animation is also active when Harry holsters a weapon. In this unused animation, Harry pulls out his hand and holds out his hand in front of him as he shifts his arm side to side to his left and his right. It can be assumed that this unused animation was repurposed for Harry equipping his lighter, as this animation is reminiscent of the Nightmare sequence where he uses his lighter in a similar animated action. It also looks similar in his animation when he equips the Floros. Another unused idle animation shows Harry standing idle as he shifts his feet side to side. This is similar to his final idle animation, where he similarly stands idle, but is less emotive in his movement. This unused animation shows Harry in a battle stance, where he's seen equipping a melee weapon, presumably the katana, whilst simultaneously emitting an action where he swings a weapon downwards. This possibly would have been purposed as a unique animation for the katana when dealing damage to a monster. While minor, Harry's death animation was more dramatic as he falls downwards to his knees as his body goes limp. In the final animation, this was slightly revised as it appears more realistic and seamless, as Harry falls to his knees and dies. In this unused animation of Harry moving sideways, initially saw him jumping side to side to his left and his right. This would later be revised to show Harry running sideways instead of jumping. Fuel meters. There originally were supposed to be fuel meters for the chainsaw and rock drill, as this image was uncovered on a Brady game strategy guide. As far as I'm concerned, I couldn't find any other relevant information that acknowledges fuel meters that could have potentially been seen in demos, review copies, or data mining the game files. This is the only known documented reference that displays this unique feature during the early stages of presumably development. This likely was unused and scrapped due to this mechanic restricting prolonged use on both the chainsaw and rock drill respectively, which possibly was frowned upon during playtesting and instead was made to use without repercussions. Alessa's pregnancy. One of the darker aspects of Silent Hill that is still discussed till this day, which may be often misinterpreted, is Alessa's pregnancy. While never talked about directly in explicit detail, it's implied during this flashback sequence of Dahlia, Kaufman, and two unnamed doctors in the basement where they're hiding Alessa's mutilated body. In the transcript, while there is dismay over the initial belief that the ritual was a failure, Dahlia reassures them that the ritual was technically a success, as Alessa holds the embryonic fetus of God inside of her. However, Alessa, in a last-ditch attempt, halted the completion of this ritual by splitting her soul in two, which prevents the birth of the Order's God. With this context, this confirms previous implications that Alessa was forcefully impregnated. The common misconception is that Alessa was sexually assaulted by another person, but this is obviously not the case, as the pregnancy alludes to this being supernatural through occult and dark practices, which were conducted by Dahlia, her own mother. Before Alessa's pregnancy, the Order would indoctrinate young women who were ignorant of the Order's true intentions, Unaware of the malicious and evil intent of using them as sacrificial offerings to have them installed as a potential surrogate mother to birth their god, Dahlia originally had the intentions of indoctrinating her daughter as her underling, who would, much like her, practice the occult teachings. But Dahlia, in an impulsive effort, decided to use her 7-year-old daughter in a ritual to forcibly impregnate her through supernatural means. Missing newspaper memo. In Nowhere, on the 3rd floor, Harry will find an altar which has puzzles that need to be solved to access both respective doors to the left and the right. On the door to the right, there's a room that is a reconstruction of Dr. Kaufman's office in Alchemilla Hospital. Inside this room, Harry can find a memo on White Claudia, which alludes to the idea that this plant was used and manufactured to create the hallucinogenic effects of the PTV drug, which was illegally sold on the black market under Kaufman. However, what is of interest is a missing newspaper memo that is not found in the US version and the initial Japanese version of Silent Hill. Interestingly, the newspaper memo titled Newspaper from 7 years ago was implemented into the PAL version of Silent Hill upon its release without issue. However, upon its revision, the revised Japanese version re-implemented the missing newspaper memo. Until this day, the only version that does not contain this missing newspaper memo is the US version. As to why this memo was seen as missing in the game's memory is due to a bug resulting in incorrect flags being written to the memory and save game files in these previous versions. Although this was fixed upon re-releases of the European and Japanese versions of Silent Hill, the conditions for unlocking this newspaper memo are still unknown to this day, as it appears to be at random. But it is concluded that all memos must be read prior before unlocking the memo of newspaper from 7 years ago. In this memo, it loosely mentions the illegal practices of the drug PTV, elicited by its unknown dealers who have yet to still be found, and suspicious deaths of notable figures such as the mayor, who is heavily against the illegal practices of this drug, and a police officer named Officer Gucci, who investigated this underground operation until he died suddenly of heart failure. Further in this newspaper memo, Harry finds a brief segment covering the Gillespie house fires that burned down 6 other houses. And unless his body was discovered in the aftermath, assumed to be diseased, it was assumed by investigators that the fire was started in the basement or the boiler room of the Gillespie house. But in reality, this was likely due to the ritual conducted by Dahlia Gillespie, resulting in this tragedy. Azusa One Go. The initial first trailer of Silent Hill, upon its reveal, was supposed to have a different soundtrack altogether that went unused as opposed to the one seen in the final version of the game. The final version would have the track She used instead. The original track, however, was supposedly titled Azusa One Go, which went unused. However, Azusa One Go would be preserved in the Silent Hill Soundsbox soundtrack. Prototype FMV. An unused FMV file found on the November 24th, 1998 prototype of Silent Hill originally had unfiltered static without audio of Cheryl screaming and the loud white noise accompanying the background's ambience. Instead, the earlier version had Cheryl without the static overlay and with a black background of Cheryl, although she's still seen doing the same animation of shouting for help, much like the final version of the game. The Mist was the original Silent Hill. The Mist refers to American novelist Stephen King and his previous work on the novella The Mist, published in 1980. In the novella, the plot centers around a small town in Bridgeton, Maine, of a group of people stuck inside a supermarket who are suddenly shrouded in a dense fog with otherworldly creatures. The protagonist, David Drayton, takes refuge inside the supermarket alongside his son, whilst trying to assess the conflict with other survivors' growing aggression and fear of the monsters in the Mist. Interestingly, Stephen King addresses the themes of the Mist to be adopted from man-made fears and religious fundamentalism. With this context, one can point out there are certain parallels between The Mist and Silent Hill, such as the fog engulfing a small town, nightmarish delusions that are manifested through otherworldly creatures, and the allusions to religious imagery and practices conducted to filter your intentions. Now, this may come off as nothing more than a mere coincidence. However, this would be confirmed in an interview with Akira Yamaoka on the website Music Japan Plus. In this interview, Akira Yamaoka reveals that around the time Resident Evil was released, he was a part of Team Silent, and they were eager to adopt a similar idea to the likes of Resident Evil, but wanted to do something incredibly unique and different to establish their own identity. This led to the idea of Stephen King's The Mist as a source of inspiration for adapting the atmosphere of a foggy setting. Yamaoka clarifies that this was not only implemented as a creative decision for the sake of portraying a gloomy and ominous atmosphere, but also in a technical sense, as the fog was creatively used to hide the textures loading, due to the limitations of the PlayStation's memory. Bad ending is canon. In Silent Hill 1, there are 5 endings, and one of these endings the player can receive, which likely will be the first ending most new-time players receive, is the bad ending. To accomplish the bad ending, the player must not forego Kaufman's side quest by failing to acquire the plastic bottle found in the kitchen, and combining it with the red liquid, creating a Galaphagus, found in the director's office of Alcamilla Hospital respectively. Furthermore, if Harry doesn't have the Galaphagus with him, then he'd be forced to kill Sybil Bennett as a result. By meeting these requirements, the player will achieve the bad ending. In this bad ending, Lassa doesn't get the incubus exercise from her, and instead is seen as the incubator, which Harry is forced to kill. In doing so, he does successfully kill Alessa, but doesn't receive the reincarnation of Cheryl, failing to save Cheryl and stopping the Order from birthing God. In a post-credits scene, Harry is seen deceased in the driver's seat of his car, implying that the bad ending is a dream sequence that was all in Harry's head as he was slowly dying from the results of the car crash. While the bad ending isn't necessarily canon, as the good ending or good plus ending is considered to be the true canon ending due to the events of Silent Hill 3 being a direct sequel, the bad ending could be considered canon in the context of Silent Hill Shattered Memories. Silent Hill Shattered Memories is set in an alternate universe with the same cast as Silent Hill 1, albeit in a different context. In this alternate universe, we see Harry trying to find Cheryl, similarly to the events of Silent Hill 1. Before proceeding, spoilers for Silent Hill Shattered Memories, as my point that needs to be made requires the ending's context in mind to be addressed. The ending of Silent Hill Shattered Memories reveals that Harry died upon impact while driving Cheryl when she was younger. Cheryl would be the sole survivor and suffer from years of trauma due to her survivor's guilt. The Harry we see playing throughout the game would be a manifestation of an analyzed version of Harry Mason, projected from Cheryl Mason's memories of her father as a coping mechanism to manage her trauma of her father's death. The writer and lead designer of Silent Hill Shattered Memories, Sam Barlow, revealed in an interview with Nintendo Life in November 2022 that he disliked Silent Hill 3 with a continuation of Harry and Cheryl's story and the bad ending of Silent Hill 1. This was due to the idea of the player feeling dismayed and soured of not only receiving the bad ending as their first ending, but also not knowing of the possibility of achieving other endings, as it's never directly addressed to the player. Barlow saw this and was displeased, and instead wanted to address this issue and fix this, by using this as a backdrop to tell the story of Silent Hill Shattered Memories to convey a heartfelt yet bittersweet ending to this premise. Beta model Harry Mason. In his early development, Harry Mason was drastically different in terms of his overall appearance and design. His beta model shows a difference in his outfit, such as wearing a green jacket, his facial appearance seems to be not as polished, and his model is unrefined and very rough in its proportions. This beta model of Harry also has very early animations. For example, in his idle animation, he is seen standing without much movement. In this animation, he is seen presumably equipping his handgun, given his actions and his hand movement. In his running animation, he is seen skipping in a bouncy-like movement. In his walking animation, he is seen walking in a very primitive and rough state that is not polished. Finally, in this animation, Harry is seen emoting in a very exaggerated and flamboyant behavior, where he's seen making hand gestures, emulating kisses that he blows in different directions he is facing. Coation.vab. There is an unused audio file titled Coation.vab that has an odd and mysterious sound that appears seemingly innocent at first glance, where you can hear birds chirping in a calm ambient atmosphere. Suddenly, this abruptly transitions to uncomfortable moaning to what sounds like someone eating, presumably flesh. This is all the obscure and unknown content, from my understanding, that I thought would be of interest to those unaware of these hidden, secret, or cryptic details of Silent Hill. I'm sure I merely scratched the surface, but I wanted to encompass an iceberg that is not well versed nor discussed in these oddities and obscurities. There is presumably far more out there about Silent Hill that we have yet to uncover, but for the time being, hopefully this suffices. If you have any information that touches upon the entries discussed in further detail or want to correct me, which is more than welcome and appreciated, then please feel free to let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas in the comments to further this conversation. Anyway, that's me. As always, thank you for watching, please have a great day, stay safe, and goodbye.